meteorologists, and most people, like lay people, are surprised by this, but it's pretty um, uh, known among meteorologists, of course. But most meteorologists are not trained in climate. So when I went to school at the University of Nebraska, my degree was in that I was going to get there before I switched schools. But the degree that I was going for was meteorology and climatology. Most of the classes are in meteorology. I took one course in physical climatology. It basically deals with Earth system structure and heat balance and things that are relevant to knowing understanding climate change. Even though the course wasn't in climate change, but most meteorologists do not get anything like that, and especially if they don't go beyond the undergraduate level. And most TV meteorologists are undergraduate level uh, people. So if they bother to actually look up any information on climate change at all, it will typically be the IPCC stuff, because they don't have any other expertise in it, and they typically don't take the time to read the papers and dive into it in greater detail. And I was like that. I was basically took the IPCC information during the mid 2000s. After I remember when the 2014 report came out, and that's the information that is always lauded as the top, accumulation of the science. But if you don't bother to do that, then you really don't know a lot about climate change. And yes, there are climate change deniers that are meteorologists. And unfortunately, one thing I've noticed is that, much like other sectors of society, you tend to find those kind of people from regions of, if you're talking about the United States for a second, since that's the area of the world that I know the best, they tend to come from areas of the country that are much more conservative. Most of the meteorologists I know that deny or are very skeptical of climate change are from here in Nebraska, or from Iowa, or from Kansas, or from Alabama. There's a very prominent meteorologist that is very, very good at weather and forecasting, and he gained some recognition during the super outbreak of tornadoes in 2011. But he's a climate change denier. He does not believe um, that the changes he believes, if you will, in the changes that science is measuring, but he thinks that it's natural variability. Um, and so uh, there is an issue here because meteorologists also tend to be the science officers of TV stations, and most people end up getting their science from meteorologists. And in every other realm, if they're asked by a news editor, "Oh, can you report on the eclipse that's coming?" or "Can you report on issues going on with um, you know with the weather, or issues going on," like, they'll report on the science as it's known. But when it comes to climate change, suddenly that politics starts to set in, and the politicalization of climate change starts to show up, and you'll have some that will say that they don't think it's as bad as it's being reported, or it just starts to creep in. Yeah, I know there was several years ago, at least, it may have changed, it may have improved, but several years ago there was a study, I believe it was a survey by the AMS, the American Meteorological Society, that showed that over a third of meteorologists, almost 40%, didn't think that climate change was caused by humans, or initiated by humans. So, I mean, it's a problem, and it's bad. It's hard enough trying to just talk about climate change, but then having to delve into these ideas related to abrupt climate change, exponential change, and there's really no room for it at all. The reason you all say that I'm the only guy that seems to say it the way it is because there's just nobody out there in my field that's doing it at all. Because it requires a level of study that is not that hard. You have lay people that do it, but you still have to go looking for it because you just won't find it from the IPCC. Um,
I I think it's also about honesty. I see when I listen to what you're writing and what you're speaking about. I think you're saying it exactly how you see it, and you're not self-editing like some of those people would be who are on salaries for those TV stations.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
there's one thing. I listened to a great interview that you did on Radio Echo Shop, and you mentioned that you thought we had been in an abrupt climate change since the 1980s. That's 3 or 4 decades ago. In a
Yeah.
time of non-linearity, that's an eternity ago. And I think I'd like to bring the conversation around to the non-linear nature of where we are now, because people are often surprised or shocked when they hear what Guy and I believe will happen in the immediate future, and it's because they don't understand the linear component of how change is happening. Could you give us your views on that, please?
Sure. First, though, on the 1980s thinking, the reason I say that is because, and I mean, even most mainstream scientists will acknowledge that something switched like a flip of a switch in the 1980s. You started into the 70s into the 1980s. Basically, you started to have more abrupt ocean warming, more abrupt atmospheric warming, particularly over the land masses. Sea ice, which we now know has been declining for decades, way beyond the 1980s. The losses of ice began to accelerate in the 1980s. I mentioned ocean warming. This is when coral reefs started to suffer greater and greater impacts from reaching the temperature required to cause coral bleaching. And then, of course, you had increasing drought in the Amazon rainforest, coupled with the destruction of the Amazon rainforest directly by increasing deforestation. So to me, and also fires globally. To me, looking back, because again, you don't really realize that you've reached a tipping point or crossed one until it's in the rear view mirror. But looking back, you see that something changed dramatically in the 1980s. And then I've started, like last year, I started to talk about how there may have been some other flip of a switch sometime in the early 2010s, mid 2010s. Sometimes I say 2014, where there was another acceleration where you started having every year be a top 5 warmest year on record, and within a few years, the previous years from like 2 or 3 years ago, that was once the warmest year on record, isn't even in the top 5 anymore. It's been long since eclipsed, and you started to see greater accelerations in heat events, greater accelerations in torrential rainfall events, further acceleration in the losses of ice in the Arctic. 2 or 3 years ago, the ice in say the Bering Sea would have been still full of ice going into May. Now it's like May conditions in the Bering Sea in February. You're starting to see breakups of ice north of Greenland in February and March. So the when you go back and look at what's been happening since 70s or 80s, and then look at now, you see this exponential curve, and even perhaps a super exponential curve, where you get a rise that's accelerating, and then it kinks up and accelerates faster all of a sudden, but you never notice it until it's already passed. And that's what I'm trying to.
That is why I want to
yeah,
have a talk about tipping points.
yeah,
I want to have a talk about tipping points, because tipping points was something that the environmental movement mentioned a lot decades ago. And now that we've crossed them and we see this multiplicative effect of having crossed so many tipping points, no one discusses them anymore. It's like, we've entered this territory where it's so terrifying, people are just pretending it's not happening. But that's not doing justice to the youth of the world,
yeah,
to warn them about what's bearing down on us.
yeah. Obviously, human nature. You've already crossed something. Who wants to talk about it, because it blows up everything you would try to do to stop it from happening. You can't stop something like that that's already started. I Everyone's concerned, and rightfully so, about the the subsea permafrost in East Siberia and sea starting to have greater releases of methane. and obviously Shikova and others have done a lot of research into those areas. But I was taken aback the past couple years by the deterioration in the permafrost over land. Even as recently as last year, would have not have thought that it would be much of an issue, but you are now seeing greater and greater, more and more research the past few years suggesting that the land is sort of, if you will, if you think of the earth as a living organism, which people suggest that it is, it's figuring out ways to destroy its own processes that stop it from heating up faster. And one of those things that it's doing is destroying the permafrost over land faster by causing tons of landslides. And and those landslides expose ice that otherwise wouldn't have melted probably for many decades, but now it can melt within a matter of weeks to months. It just sits there exposed because a landslide knocks it over and exposes the ice, and then more
There's
slids
similarities.
over. That's a non-linearity.
There's
I mean, you,
similarities with coastal
yeah,
erosion. I know exactly what you mean.
yeah,
As a sailor, I've had a lot to do with coastal erosion. But when I see what's happening up in the Arctic and the permafrost slumps, it has real parallels. And what you're saying is right. The minute you have those slumps, you let the air and the sunshine deep into the permafrost. So of course that's the self-reinforcing feedback loop.
yes, yes. I mean, it catastrophically destroys the the land permafrost, you know, inch by inch, foot by foot, square mile by square mile. And I mean, the dramatic rise in them again since the 1980s has been, it's almost, there is no, to me, there, some of these feedback loops, there is no adjective to describe how catastrophic they are. But I think to a lot of these environmentalists who want to save the world, it's so big that they can't fathom even thinking about it, and it is big, because these are processes that should be taking hundreds to thousands of years, and it's beyond just like sea ice and other things that you expect to go relatively quickly, but ice locked in the ground, you do not expect to be destroyed in a matter of years, but that's what's happening, and you don't expect, entire forests and biomes to be burned, die, and be wiped out in a matter of years. That's what's happening around the world, not even including what humans are doing and directly destroying those forests through cutting down and flattening the forest for agriculture or for resources. It's just so big that a lot of people are unable to wrap their brains around it, because when you do, then you realize that it's not in human control any longer, and it never was in human control, unless you think maybe very very early on in industrialization we could have stopped this, but that would have meant not using all of that energy that was available to us to become what we are now in terms of our impact on the planet. And unfortunately, humans don't think that far ahead.
Well, that brings up an
I
interesting
s-
point.
go on, go. Yep.
With respect to feedbacks, it seems that we, at least as a society and maybe as a species, we tend to be forward thinking. We've spent very little time looking in our past. Instead, we're driving that car and we're always looking forward, seeing what's ahead of us. And so if the feedbacks are already behind us, if those tipping points, we already ran over them with the car, then one, there's nothing to be done about it. And so since we're such a can-do society and we greatly disparage people who we think are not doing anything, and two, it's we can't possibly stop it now. It's already in the rearview mirror. So I think the combination of those things contributes to our ignoring or downplaying the impact of those feedback loops that we've already triggered. Can you comment about that? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's interesting thought actually. In
Hey,
some
Nick,
ways, yeah, go ahead.
No, you carry on. Sorry.
Okay, yeah.
The delays here.
I was gonna say, humans, tend to be, they tend to be very forward thinking when it comes to not wanting to deal with, issues of the past impacting the issues of now or the future. Um, but yet they don't want to consider what that future might actually hold. But that's because they don't think about what happened in the past. And it's kind of a weird catch-22. But I find that humans, my fellow humans, I mean, literally, you have a few scattered human beings, working for some of these think tanks that are just taking a very stark, honest assessment. Like I was looking at the recent report before this interview of the by Code Red on the idea that civilization will be gone by 2050, just in business as usual. And they don't take into account any of the feedbacks. It's literally just business as usual, no feedbacks. This is what is likely to happen, and it's making some rounds on more alternative media sources, but nobody's talking about it. Nobody's up in arms about it. Nobody's even arguing against it. Everyone's just like silent. It's one of the weirdest phenomenon that I've ever seen. I commented to a friend of mine saying that it seems like there is a new type of global denialism taking hold on the planet. And it's not necessarily just climate change denial. It's denial even by those that accept the science of climate change, that the consequences are now. We're already seeing just 2100 to 2050, 2100 impacts as the IPCC would consider them happening right now. We're seeing others that are really just down the road, either this year or years away. We're looking at at global agriculture basically being beat the hell out of by the planet right now. Like we listed earlier, all of these places are having crop failures or failures to plant. They don't even have a chance to fail. They're just not even getting planted. And yet, people post about their cats or something. It's like kind of the perpetual cat video. Anything to ignore what is happening, or they get.
I'm here because I don't believe that Australia's Prime Minister is doing a good enough job securing my future and the future of all generations to come. I think we deserve to live in a country that is 100% renewable and that has a fair-minded and well-respected government. And at the moment, unfortunately, our government isn't meeting those standards. So I'm here to support the climate strike, leaving my school, coming here instead, and I am protesting for a better future. My dad actually sent me the information. He's always been very big on renewable resources and doing whatever he can to not use plastic. So both my parents are in full support and they are extremely proud of me for doing this. And I hope I'm making them proud. And I am.
We would be in school if they would do their job.
Yeah, and honestly, they need to grow up and they need to act at their age. Because we're here doing it for them. We shouldn't have to do this. They should be doing their job, but they're not.
And it just upsets me so much because I just don't know if they're going to do anything. And I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to what's going to happen to the whole world? If no one does anything, because it's just not fair. It's not fair on all the animals. It's not fair on the climate. It's not fair, and we need to find new politics.
So can you tell us what it is that you want from our government to secure your future?
We want our government to...
You want climate action?
We need climate action. We need to be 100% renewable. We need to make sure that we have have futures now. Kids have futures because it's always been my dream to start a family, and now I feel like I would be burdening them because they have to live in a society where they might just walk outside in winter and get sunburned because of how bad climate change is. We want climate action, and we're not going to wait 12 years until we can't do anything. We need it now.
And I just don't understand why no one talks about it. Obviously, now we're having a change, but people are actually voting for people like Scott Morrison, and it's just ridiculous because he's a monster. He's a monster to Australia, and I want Australia to live in a world where we can, to live in a country where we are free from all things that of climate change, and it's so stupid, and I just wish that he could just change his mind. And that's why we're here today, because we want to change his mind.
Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani! Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani! Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate action!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate action!
When do we want it?
Now! Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani! Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani! Stop Adani! Stop, stop Adani! Climate action!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate action!
When do we want it?
Now!
Tread softly